folks. Welcome back. Everybody enjoy themselves? It's fantastic. I can't tell you how gratifying it is to see everybody out there conversing together. It's amazing. So thank you all again for being here. Thank you for connecting with one another. I was hoping, when we planned out these introductions yesterday, that maybe like a natural story about connection would arise. And if you don't mind, I'm going to tell you just a crazy coincidence that happened to me outside. So you heard me mention when I introduced Cammie that, I've had a similar experience as a dad. So somebody outside stopped me and said, "Hey, I just want to let you know that your story and Cammie's story resonates with me." He said, I'm actually a medevac helicopter pilot." And I said, "Out of Saranac Lake?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "My daughter was flown from a helicopter from Saranac Lake to Albany." He's like, I can't guarantee it. He's like, "But there's a very real chance that I was the helicopter pilot who flew your daughter to Saranac Lake." Talk about natural connections. It's amazing. I would be remiss with the opportunity to once again make mention of the folks behind the scenes who have made all of this possible. Matt Dickey, who's running the camera over here. I feel like the lead singer of a band who's in like the break, and we're Paul Frederick in the back running. It's actually happy birthday, Paul. Today is Paul's birthday. He's celebrating with us. Rick Godin, who is up top. You can't see him, but he's the master running the board behind us. Emily Martin is in the back taking photos. Thank you for being here, Emily. We can't wait to see him. Carrie Zeman, who is running the teleprompter. This would not be possible without Carrie. Carrie has watched this program in its entirety 4 times, and she has not once seen it actually delivered. She has looked at that teleprompter faithfully, and we appreciate your help because Lord knows where we would be without it. So, to move on to our last block of speakers, I'm very fortunate to be able to introduce Randy Renata. Randy is an artist, a sculptor, a naturalist. Randy is a 2020 MFA graduate of the sculpture department of the Yale School of Art. Her permanent public sculptures have been featured in interior design and sculpture magazines. She is also the recipient of numerous awards and fellowships, and we are honored to have her on stage to reflect on her inspiration and design. So without further ado, welcome Randy Renata. Yeah.
There is an emotional state of being, a sort of pale blue feeling, an imagined sense of spatial awareness when I look at the Voyager 1's photograph of Earth. I imagine the humans sent into space in the 1960s who look back at our Earth and saw a pale blue dot. What was it like to imagine from space that they lived there? Could they imagine locating themselves within this speck of blue? And what is that pale blue dot feeling? The feeling of expanse and belonging that we all, to some degree, consistently search for. The feeling of being small, but deeply interconnected in the vast fabric of this universe. I think the secret in that blue feeling is in the collective. As an artist, I'm looking for the webs of connections, not only between us and the cosmos at large, but us and nature, us and each other, other humans. In the late spring of 2020, when I was finishing my MFA in sculpture and on track for our thesis show, I found myself for the first time in the Adirondack Mountains. Shortly after New York State's lockdown, driving up on highways 5 hours, possibly seeing 10 other cars on an otherwise empty road my entire trip. It was kind of eerie. And as I sought to, in my own isolation and unknown futures, immerse myself outside, I found myself hiking a lot in the mountains, feeling an overwhelming drive to get to the summit, to see my surroundings from a totally new perspective, a bird's eye view. On the summit, I breathed into the landscape, able to see so far into the blue haze of those distant mountains, nestled around lakes and rivers that are very much alive. I am part of something larger than myself. Where do we share unity? Where do we share alignment? How are we connecting to each other? From root systems of trees that use mycelial networks to send nutrients to its sick neighbor, coral reefs, with many individual organisms gathered in symbiotic colonies. From our synapses and neural networks to the beautiful strings of the quantum realm, there's this repeating rhizomatic pattern in the way that the universe is laid. I have always seen sculpture as an aperture for perception, how artists can really create these spaces that emote and transmit certain feelings and ideas. Sculpture can transport us. It's very tactile, phenomenological. It's a fully embodied way of being in the world and creating imaginative relationships. And in this time of isolation and unknown futures, I needed to be brought into a different kind of world, a world of webs and interconnectivity. And on one of those summit moments, standing in the high peaks, meditating on that amazing blue of the atmosphere in the distance, I felt my next sculpture forming. At the Adirondack History Museum in Elizabethtown, the following summer of 2021, I began to build this sculptural encounter. It was a nod to the blue feeling I had on those long summit moments, looking into the atmosphere in the direction of my then temporary home. I named the artwork, "Blue is the atmospheric refraction I see you through." Its form is a sculptural lens for a type of collective framework. The sculpture is designed to be a participation between two people. Incised in the dome are two twin staircases that gently curve into a recess and meet at its apex. As you walk up the stairs, you become fully enveloped in the blue walls, shifting perspectives as you continue up, in, and then out of the blue wall's embrace. On the final step, you rest your hands on the dome's curvature and directly face another viewer. The dome can be a mountain. It can be a planet. For me, the shape holds a lot of momentum that's pushing two particles together like currents, spheres shaped by gravity in our cosmic soup. I was also thinking about stellar observatories, like my favorite McDonald Observatory in West Texas, my home state. It was here that I first peered through a telescope to see the rings of Saturn with my own eyes. I was also thinking about dome-shaped listening towers like Teufelsberg outside Berlin, where I lived for some years before returning to graduate school. To me, mountains were also like a structure that you climb up and out into a different perspective. At the time, I was reading and reflecting on distance, subjectivity, longing. Maggie Nelson's novel, Bluets, was often in my hiking backpack. Two participants walking up the sculpture steps have similar yet distinct experiences of climbing twin staircases that are recessed into this larger dome. Twin staircases are key here to the architecture of this sculpture. They require mirrored movements, activating what's called mirror neurons. While I was in graduate school, I was interested in following the overlapping threads that merge the art and science practices. Artists and scientists have similar ways of being in the lab or the studio by creating hypotheses, testing, experimenting with matter. In the sculptural realm, we're looking at philosophies of phenomenology, body movement in space, and how spaces impact our felt senses and really shift us. I wanted to learn more, but from a neuroscience perspective. So I found myself in a cognitive science lab meeting during graduate school. I was intrigued by the idea that there are a subset of neurons that correlate to human empathy and drive our connection to each other. In short, mirror neurons are triggered by shared actions or movements between people. So take this image of Studio 54, for example, and imagine yourself on a crowded dance floor, getting lost in movement and mirroring other people's disco moves. Or dancing with a partner. Your actions are not the same, but complementary, moving in tandem and combining to something greater. In a recent 2023 study titled Enhanced Neural Synchrony Associated with Long-Term Ballroom Dance Training, dancing partners become increasingly similar the longer they've danced together. When we move with someone, especially someone we've moved with for a long enough time, our brains become more and more unified. So, in the case of my blue sculpture, two people are executing the same motor acts, moving around into and up the curved stairwell. They are then faced with each other, standing at a short distance and elevated from the earth. Somatically, this becomes a space of encounter, a terrain to see and be seen by others, to recognize and be recognized. Another question I ask myself as a sculptor is how colors and design can take the stage for our collective experiences. After holding so many color swatches from the paint sections of hardware stores and failing to find the right shade of blue, I made my own from natural pigments and binders with an early recipe similar to the first paint made by humans. This particular shade I call atmospheric blue. It's somewhere between a blue-gray and a periwinkle. The color I wanted to capture was that blue, drawn from our expansive atmosphere, inspired by staring at the blue haze of those distant mountains. Now, atmospheric blue is a tricky one to capture because it hovers over the objects in the landscape and is metaphysically questioned to be real. Is it the atmosphere, the ozone? How is it that I have learned so many times why the sky is blue but can never seem to remember the details? Blue is more of a feeling. Blue is the haze of those far away peaks, their gradient mist inviting a deep sense of longing and belonging. Blue is the atmospheric refraction I see you through. As I continue to build the sculpture, nail by nail, I was brought back to that blue feeling a part of the greater sphere. Everything that we see as large is made up of the small and even smaller. Relational ways of being across ecosystems. And when we look at each other, perhaps it is also through this blue lens. Our individual viewpoints and past experiences color our perception of each other. Summits can be craved. Climbing higher to get that view. Scaling steps, ascending out of our bodies to experience the world from many views and to locate ourselves within. Such sight gives us distance to read our connective tissue. What are the synapses that bind us? The micro of the individual that weaves into the macro of the collective whole. That blue feeling. Blue is the glimmering shape I see below when I am on the summit, the lake at the end of the road, now with a strange finger of inferred trees jutting out into the shape's belly. From these heights, texture translates to color washes, and we are but small filaments, interconnected in this larger dome. Thank you.
Just as a reminder, if you want to see that sculpture yourself, that's here. It's in the Adirondacks. Head to Elizabethtown, to the Adirondack History Museum, and go experience it. But I encourage, bring someone with you. That's something you want to experience with someone else. So art can transform hearts and minds. Tonight, I think, just really reaffirms that to me. We have been infused with all of these connections and blends of the arts and the sciences. Now, our next speaker, Stephanie Aschenfelder, is a storyteller at their core. They center their work on using story as a medium to ignite individual and societal change. Her socially conscious, interdisciplinary, collaborative projects integrate art, design, and community building. Her ongoing work with Adirondack Climate Stories aims to promote climate action by highlighting our humanity, sharing and reflecting on the local consequences of climate change. Let us welcome Stephanie to the stage. Stephanie.
Art and storytelling have the power to move the needle on climate change. They have the power to foster connection, reflection, and transformation, and can promote hope and engagement as we work through climate anxiety. By sharing our stories and expressing ourselves creatively, we empower not only ourselves, but others to act. Across the globe, towns and cities are grappling with increasingly common impacts of climate change, whether it's extreme weather or rising temperatures. Art and storytelling can help us process these challenges and also inspire solutions. They remind us that resilience is not only a scientific or policy-based goal, it's a human goal built through connection and understanding. Said another way, our climate crisis has a communication problem. It's art and storytelling that have the power to move the needle on climate change. Climate science has often relied on data-driven approaches. However, facts and numbers, while they are important, they don't always inspire the personal motivation we need for change. Art and storytelling can serve as a bridge between the cold, hard facts of science and the emotions that we need to feel in order to take action. Unlike numbers or facts, stories and art can trigger an emotional response and drive a permanent form of social change. Why? Because stories and art focus on what makes us human. They center us on human values, emotions, and the spirit of our expression. And when it comes to the climate crisis, it is our shared humanity that is going to save us. Sharing scientific data, while critical, hasn't effectively engaged or connected people to climate change in a way that inspires deep understanding or action. If the goal is to inspire action, then it is storytelling and an art that we need to lean into to save the planet. Stories are about felt experiences. They make the invisibility of climate change seen, felt, imagined. They create space for us to grieve, to process loss, and most importantly, to embrace hope. Let's take a few minutes to hear a brief clip from a powerful climate story we re-recorded last fall here at the Wild Center.
So I'm going to try to say this without crying, and I'm already emotional just thinking about what I want to say. When I think about climate change, when I think about imagining ourselves in a place, understanding the earth, I think about the importance of not just imagining yourself somewhere, but being there, going there, seeing firsthand the beauty of a world that is dying. Sorry. I've been coming to the Adirondacks from my home in Otsego County since I was 4. I studied at Paul Smith's. I even helped with a lot of development in Lake Placid, different projects. I've hiked all over the place, done long canoe trips. And I love it here. I love it. It is one of the most beautiful places I have ever visited in my life. And I want the world to see it for generations to come. I don't want it to die with me.
Humans are inherently social beings. We are wired to connect with others. Stories allow us to simulate social experiences, even when we're alone. When you heard that story, the same regions in your brain activated as if you were experiencing those events firsthand. This process is called neural mirroring. It fosters empathy and understanding. So by participating in shared narratives, we feel part of something larger, part of a community. This neural basis for social connection explains why stories can play such a crucial role in communicating the climate crisis. Just like storytelling, art has the power to move us, and not just emotionally, move us toward action. Research from the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business highlights the power of emotional engagement through imagery. Their study found that beautiful images of nature significantly increased social media clicks and even led to more donation dollars for conservation organizations. Photography captured the beauty of the natural world and fostered a deep emotional connection that moved people to act. Art that focuses on climate change can also deepen our connection to the issue by encouraging reflection. It challenges us to consider not only what humanity has done, but what each of us can do to protect the environment. Artists who channel their creativity into activism have the potential to be true agents of change. By telling visual stories about our planet, artists drive awareness and bring light to the urgent challenges we face. So how does this conviction look in practice for me as an artist and an educator? I co-direct the Adirondack Climate Project with Rose Pasquarello-Beauchamp, and I lead an initiative that explores the human experience of climate change through storytelling and art. Using a mobile audio recording studio, we traverse the Adirondack Park, inviting its inhabitants to share their personal narratives reflected in the changing climate of their surroundings. A central part of our work is an annual artist retreat, which is held right here in the Adirondack Park. This immersive week-long experience is designed to nurture a vibrant, supportive community of artists who share a deep connection to the landscape and a passionate commitment to addressing climate change. It's a space where art becomes activism and creativity transforms into a powerful force for environmental change. The 3 pieces I want to share with you today were created as part of that artist retreat just down the road. This accordion-style book is titled Life Cycle of a Tick. It was created by Rachel Devona, a farmer and artist living in Ionia, New York. Here, Rachel uses the Adirondack Park as a backdrop to explore the tick's life cycle. Over the past 13 years, Lyme's disease cases have increased by 1.5 times statewide. But in the Adirondacks, there's been an alarming 20-fold increase. Scientists directly link this surge to a warming climate. Through her art, Rachel visually educates her audience, drawing attention to a very real consequence of climate change: its profound impact on animal species. Her piece reminds us that climate change isn't just an abstract issue, it's something that affects us in deeply personal and local ways. Art like Rachel's helps us grasp these complex realities and fosters a deeper connection to our environment. And to inspire meaningful climate action, we need more than just passive awareness. We need true, deep, active engagement. True engagement goes beyond simply absorbing information. It's a felt experience. Musician Dan Lynch captures how tapping into our emotions can foster a connection that motivates us to act. Dan is a songwriter, a performer, and an audio engineer based in Rochester, New York, with a passion for preserving New York State folk music. During his time at our artist retreat, he listened to the stories of local community members and wrote The Ballad of an Adirondacks, a song about the devastation caused by Hurricane Irene in the Adirondack Park. Through his music, Dan captures not only the physical impact of the storm, but also the emotional toll it took on this community. Let's listen to just a few moments from Dan's song, and you'll feel the emotional depth that engagement with climate stories and music can spark.
West Canada Creek just ain't the same since Irene, the hurricane. My father and me used to fish all day, but now it's not as deep. Trophy trout's gone away. Give it another week, another century. Will this all be gone? Complete catastrophe. The Halloween storm of 2019 washed out Marcy Field in Keene Valley, and my mother weeps torrential rain. Her childhood home up and floated away. 100-year flood seasonally. What can be done? Climate resiliency.
Even humor can play a vital role in inspiring climate action. Studies have shown that climate-related comedy helps people feel more optimistic and committed to taking action. Take memes, for example. They increase engagement with our online climate movements. Humor, when it's used carefully, allows us to break down the seriousness of climate change into something a little more relatable. It provides a way in, especially for people who find traditional environmental messaging a little too heavy-handed or even off-putting. Let's take a look at Missy Smith's piece, Cottages, as an example. It's tongue-in-cheek, but it addresses the serious business of climate change using humor to provoke thought and invite viewers into the conversation.
So the seasons are changing. And you'll hear from some friends of mine who live up here year-round. They used to do ice boat racing on the lake, and the lake would completely freeze. Bill's mother, back in the early 1920s and 30s, had stories of people, the lake would completely freeze, and if they wanted to move cottages across the lake, they would bring them across on the ice. That was the easiest way to relocate cottages. That now the lake freezes. It froze last winter, but very late and very briefly. I don't even know if it froze solid enough that you could dare to move a cottage across on it. It gets warmer earlier, so the seasons now are accelerating. So spring comes earlier, the water warms up sooner, the spring flowers are gone earlier. It's hard to say in terms of the foliage that last year we had a terrible moth invasion, and the mountain across the road was completely defoliated.
Art and storytelling connect us emotionally to the climate crisis in ways that data cannot. These creative expressions help us imagine, feel, and understand the changes happening in our world and inspire us to find solutions. Since I'm also an educator, I took these principles into the classroom, and in a course that I taught with Rose at the University of Rochester, to explore just how this conviction might play out in an educational setting. We designed an interdisciplinary collaborative course where students were introduced to the use of arts in designing for and expressing a vision for a sustainable future. Our research and story collection in the Adirondack Park was used to inspire projects in the course. Collaboration, design thinking, and the iterative design process was used to produce performances and artwork that respond to climate stories we've collected in the park. After the course, we surveyed the students, and we found out that 95% of our students believe that art could be an effective tool for inspiring climate action. They said things like, "To this day, this is one of my favorite classes. Saying I was in an art class about climate change opens people up to the most interesting climate conversations I've had in my adult life so far." So climate change has a communication crisis. We need creative stories, photographs, films, poetry, music to make the planetary upheaval of climate change shared and felt emotionally. Only then can we envision a viable strategy for action and social transformation. From abolition to suffrage, from the civil rights movement to AIDS discrimination, history shows us that every major social movement has been bolstered by the arts and its contributions to the larger conversation. So imagine a world where climate action is a shared priority, driven by the stories we tell and the art that we create. By engaging with climate change through the arts, we can foster empathy, inspire hope, and motivate others to act. Your contributions, whether through storytelling or art, or even by sharing beautiful images of nature on your social media feed, can help build a more connected, compassionate, and resilient world. You might have seen this QR code while you were here today. It will lead you to a site where you can share your climate story and listen to the stories of others while you're here at TEDx. Let's use the power of our shared humanity to save the planet one story at a time. Thank you.
All right, we're here. The last talk of the evening, rounding it all out. Now, Kurt Steger, who's going to be our next and final speaker of this evening, is a scientist, an educator, and an author whose research and outreach deals with climate change, humanity, and our connections to the natural world. He has studied environmental history in Africa, the Adirondacks, and far beyond. Just strike up a conversation with Kurt. You're going to get some great stories. Writing is one of the things, and communicating are two things that he does extremely well. He has written periodicals for National Geographic, the New York Times. If you want to listen to his soothing voice after this, he co-hosted Natural Selections, a part of NCPR's weekly programming, for over 30 years. So there's a whole archive there that you can go and explore. As a scientist and an educator, Kurt taught me a couple of really important things. The first was to question. Question what you see. Question your assumptions. Question your biases. And to welcome many perspectives to unveiling the answers to those questions, which inevitably leads you to more questions, so it's all about questions. And the second thing that he taught me was to hope. To have hope in the world. To not just see it and find it, but to believe in it once you do. Tonight, you're going to get a chance as well to hear that story from him. So let us welcome our final rounded out speaker here, Kurt Steger.
Words matter. They can reflect who we are, and they can help to shape who we are. The names and the stories we use can reveal a lot about ourselves and also conceal hidden truths. And sometimes the words and the stories we don't tell and that we don't use can also be equally powerful. Take this place where we are right now, for example. The Adirondack State Park is a 6 million acre mosaic of public and private land in northern New York that's bigger than Yosemite and Yellowstone and the Grand Canyon combined. And our beautiful mountains and lakes are a magnet for visitors from around the world. And our local residents depend on those visitors for our livelihoods. But for most locals and visitors alike, the human story of this place usually begins in the 1800s with the arrival of Anglo-European wilderness guides and hoteliers and lumberjacks. But when we say welcome to the Adirondacks, we often forget that the story of people on this landscape is much richer and deeper and more welcoming than that, as we'll soon see. So the same is true of this small college on the shore of Lower St. Regis Lake. It's named after Paul Smith, who built a world-famous luxury resort here with his wife Lydia in 1859. It's now Paul Smith's College, where I've taught for the last several decades. And we're proud to have Smith as our namesake, but there's a lot more to the story of this place than good old Paul. The words of James Wardner, a local hotelier and a contemporary of Paul Smith, opens a window on a deeper story. In his memoir, he claimed to have advised Paul Smith to build his hotel on the lake about where the Indians are camping. Well, many Adirondackers are actually surprised to learn that Native people have lived on these rugged uplands since the end of the last ice age. That hidden heritage has often been left out of the stories that pass for Adirondack history. But stone artifacts found on our own campus show that people have been living here for thousands of years. And their descendants are still here. The roots of, yes. And we're glad of it. So the roots of human history run deep in these mountains, and we're proud of this chapter in the story of our community. The story of this landscape also includes a more recent chapter that's long been overlooked and misrepresented. My own introduction to it began soon after I moved here, when a friend pointed to a remote stream on the college's property in Onchioto and said, "Guess what that stream's called?" It was N-word Brook. We both wondered what such an unpleasant name was doing here in the welcoming Adirondacks. But nobody in the area seemed to have a valid explanation for it. It was frustrating for me, but it was also a problem for the rest of us at Paul Smith College. Our faculty were embarrassed whenever students asked about it on field trips. We knew the story of Paul Smith well enough, but nothing about this N-word brook on our own property. Well, once again, Wardner's memoir opened a new chapter in our story. His version of it wasn't long, and it wasn't pleasant. He said that black settlers cleared some land along a large brook nearby during the mid-1800s. Because of the Negroes, the brook was called by the white people N-word Brook. And they gradually died or moved away. And that's how we ended the story. Well, I wanted to know more, so I turned to the usual source. An amateur historian named Alfred Donaldson wrote a history of the Adirondacks a century ago, and it's still a major go-to document in these parts. Unfortunately, it's full of errors and crude stereotypes. Here's an example of how Donaldson told the story of those black settlers. The Adirondack wilderness, for obvious reasons, was the least attractive and least suited to the Negro. They did nothing for themselves or for their own land. As a Negro colony, it was a failure and soon dwindled away. Fortunately, a new generation of local historians is doing a better job of researching the story of these settlers. With their help and digging around in various archives, I learned that our little brook was part of a much larger story of the Adirondacks and of America itself. It's much more amazing and inspiring than I could have imagined from the way it's been told in the past. During the mid-1800s, this landscape was a hotbed of social activism at a time when it was still legal to enslave human beings. The Adirondacks were the focus of a dream of a better America, an inspiring quest for human equality based on land ownership and multiracial communities in the mountains. Frederick Douglass himself helped to promote black empowerment through settlement in the Adirondacks during the 1840s. To support that dream, a philanthropist named Gerrit Smith donated 120,000 acres of his Adirondack properties to 3,000 black settlers from the state of New York, in part to empower them to vote in state elections. Abolitionist John Brown moved here with his family to help the settlers establish their farms and homesteads. Brown and 4 other white Adirondackers would later lose their lives in defense of that dream of human equality at Harper's Ferry in West Virginia. Well, I now wanted a more visual way to grasp the scale of African American influence here. So I began with a map from 1858 that showed where property lots were indicated around my hometown of North Elba. I then used Gerrit Smith's handwritten records to color in every lot that was granted to an African American, and the result was astonishing. Roughly half of those 150 square miles from the high peaks to Bloomingdale and beyond were once black owned. And adding another sector that included Onchioto and the Brook nearly doubled that amount. Only a few of those landowners actually settled here, but the visual impact of the maps was powerful. This was nothing like what I got from those older sources, and it made me even more determined to find the real story behind our little brook. Well, Wardner's memoir offered another clue when he mentioned one of the local black settlers by name. John Thomas was one of several Smith grantees who settled in Vermontville, a small hamlet several miles northwest of Lake Placid. We have no photo of John Thomas, but we do have some of his words. In 1872, he sent a letter to Gerrit Smith to thank him for the property and also to tell his own dramatic story. He was born around 1810, enslaved by a plantation owner named Ezekiel Merrick in Maryland. I wore the fetters of slavery for 29 years, he wrote. When Merrick sold his wife and children away to the South, Thomas was devastated, and he decided then to liberate himself. He fled north by way of the Underground Railroad to Troy, New York, where he settled for a time and started a new family with his new wife, Mary. And in 1846, Gerrit Smith gave him an undeveloped property near Plummador Pond, but it was too rugged and remote to be useful. So he explained to Smith in his letter, owing to the inconvenience of church and school privileges, I sold that lot and bought 50 acres near the village. Well, soon the Thomas family had established a prosperous farm among their white and black neighbors. They grew potatoes and other crops. They raised cattle and sheep, and they tripled the size of their farm. They found sanctuary in the Adirondacks, and they were living the dream. But one day, their dream almost became a nightmare. Back in Maryland, Ezekiel Merrick learned of John Thomas's whereabouts and sent bounty hunters north to capture him and return him to bondage. The intruders got as far as Franklin Falls, several miles from the Thomas farm, but when word of this reached Vermontville, friends and neighbors confronted the bounty hunters and drove them off. John Thomas was a valued member of the community by then, and local residents rallied around him as a fellow Adirondacker. So John Thomas embodied the Adirondack ideal of empowerment through land ownership in a multiracial community. And looking back on his life in 1872, he told Smith that, I've breasted the storm of prejudice and opposition. But his next line made it clear that the success story was not without problems. Until I begin to be regarded as an American citizen. That note of irony speaks volumes. For some of his neighbors, his skin color still marked him as an outsider. Wardner's memoir contained crude racial jokes about John Thomas. And the name of the nearby brook also served as a reminder that a civil war and constitutional amendments had still not brought full equality and justice to the Adirondacks. Even today, distorted versions of the story add further insult to the injury. These farmers were not failures, but hardworking, successful Adirondackers, and they were not mere transients. John and Mary Thomas had found sanctuary in Vermontville and spent the rest of their lives there. They're buried next to each other in the local cemetery. They also left descendants who still live in and around the region. And the Thomas farm is still in cultivation. Its current owner, Denise Griffin, didn't know the amazing story of her property when she bought it, but the name she gave it was more appropriate than she realized at the time. She called it Sanctuary Farm. But what about the brook? Other streams and landforms in the area bear the names of Thomas's white neighbors. There's Lion Brook, there's Norman Ridge, and even the amateur historian Alfred Donaldson has a peak named after him. John Thomas and his fellow African-American settlers get this brook name instead. Well, the label was modified several decades ago, but it still identifies these Adirondackers not by their names, but by the color of their skin. So, nice try, but we can do better than that. The time had come for a change. But what could I do as an individual to replace both the story and the name of a landform? As I soon learned, you don't do it as an individual. You do it as part of a community. More specifically, you need to convince the United States Board on Geographic Names to change it. It's not easy, and several friends warned me that it might be impossible. The board's website explained the lengthy process. Once the story is properly documented and a suitable name is chosen, the most important step is to demonstrate local community support for it. But what would my community think of the idea? We Adirondackers can be cantankerous, and we're not afraid to argue over things. Some of us even seem to enjoy it. As it turned out, I didn't need to worry. Throughout the fall of 2022, letters of support came in from the students and the faculty and the staff at Paul Smith College. Local museums, historical organizations, and social justice groups joined in. So did town and county officials. And when I presented the story of John Thomas and the brook at a local brew pub, dozens of local residents signed their names to a petition too. So in December of 2022, I sent a formal proposal along with the letters and petition to the Board on Geographic Names and waited with fingers crossed. Their decision came the following April. Meet John Thomas Brook. It's official, and it's permanent. Look for it on any up-to-date map of the Adirondacks. Well, we cantankerous Adirondackers do know how to celebrate together, too. In September of 2023, more than 100 people gathered near the brook in Onchiota. Dave Fadden from the Six Nations Iroquois Cultural Center and Tiffany Ray Fisher of the Adirondack Diversity Initiative spoke about the importance of the name change and the community support that enabled it. But another main point of the gathering was to help make sure that the story behind the name isn't forgotten so easily this time. So we unveiled a historic roadside marker on the college's property, and it reads, John Thomas Brook. John Thomas escaped from slavery in Maryland about 1840 and lived near this brook in Vermontville. But the last words carry special weight. They're a response from this community to the letter John Thomas wrote in 1872. And they can still raise a lump in my throat when I read them. As a prosperous farmer and respected citizen. I'm so proud to be part of this community. We saw the need for a change in the story of this beautiful place we love, and we rallied to make it happen. I haven't heard a single voice of opposition to it around here, but maybe some folks elsewhere might accuse us of erasing history by changing the name of N-word Brook. We would disagree. By honoring our fellow Adirondacker in this way, we're not erasing history. We're recovering history that's been erased. So words do matter. The words we use to describe ourselves and our communities both reflect and shape who we are. The real story of the Adirondacks is not a short, dull monochrome, but a deep, rich, multicultural tapestry of human experience. By uncovering the story of this little brook in the wilderness, we're reconnecting ourselves to a proud chapter of America's story too, when the dream of human equality burns so brightly here in the mountains. That's a heritage we can all take pride in when we say, welcome to the Adirondacks. The real Adirondacks. Thank you for listening. Thank you. Thank you.
I think we need one more. I know I keep doing this, but come on. Words escape me. I mean, this was the perfect way to close out this evening. To have us reflect on what do we want the Adirondacks to be? What stories do we want to tell? What people do we want to represent? What voices do we want to uplift? We have that choice before us today. What can we do about it? How can we foster these connections? How can we learn more about our storied past, but also consider what that means for the future generations of the Adirondacks and beyond? So thank you all for being here tonight, being a part of this conversation, and being the spark for future conversations that's only going to make this place more amazing, more resilient, and be a shining beacon for what rural communities can mean. So thank you.
And one last time before we go, we want to thank every single person who made this possible, even if it's not by name. Our sponsors, Explore Adirondack Frontier, Adirondack Land Trust, the Reynolds Group, Tai Chi with Josie D. We want to thank the volunteers who have helped all night. We want to thank especially Jen and Kim who made all of this happen. The Wild Center staff who have worked long hours. We want to thank all of you who have been here to help us celebrate the very first ever TEDxTupper Lake. And last but not least, the 13 individuals who agreed to come on this kind of crazy ride with us. I think all of them are first-time TEDx speakers. And I can tell you, we've put in, I don't know how many hours in the last 6 or 8 months to plan this, but to see you all here, to see the results, to see what comes out from this community is truly inspirational, and it's been an unbelievable experience for all of us. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.